Hi everyone, welcome back to our TanStack Query or React Query course. So up to last video, we're able to create a paginated component where we can use query to handle the load of the API details whenever we click next or previous page. Now let's see how we can lay out some basic unit tests to start with, and I'll leave it for you if you want to add more complex scenarios and play around at your end. So this is our component, right? Where we have two buttons, previous page and next page button, and all what they do is just set in the state, and that triggers our component to re-render, and whenever we do that, the use query is getting triggered. Okay, so for example, if you're in page 1 and you click next button, you go to page number 2, which fetch a new data with a query key of post and number 2. But if you click previous, because of the caching thing, so we don't have to trigger any API, it just pick up the data from the previous call we have made. So we went through all that in my previous video. Now let's see how we can do some unit tests. So firstly, because we're using the use query, I need to make a mock here as well as we did in previous videos. And then we have to import our test files. So again, import render to render my component, fire event to trigger the click on my button, and wait for to test after my assign calls are done from testing library / react. Next thing we have to do is we have to import the use query itself. Even if we mock it, we have to import it, and then we have to import our components. Of course, that one we need to test. Now let's start create some descriptions, and we need an arrow function. Okay, and let's do a first test where we can test that our loading state is loading properly. Okay, so how we can do that? Let's create our test, and of course for this one we have to mock the value we're getting back from our use query. So I'll just copy and paste it right here for you. So all I'm doing is say use query, then mock the return value, and of course we know the loading is listening to is pending property, so we're setting that one to true. Okay, now all what you have to do now is that render my component. Okay, and as you remember, it accepts two parameters, the page and set page. Okay, so I'm setting my page to 1, like the first page, and then I'm getting back my get by text from the render. Okay, then I want to check if my loading text, which is here, does it exist on the UI or not. Okay, so I'm saying expect get by text loading to be on document. Simple as that. Let's save this, and it worked. Now next thing to test, let's see if we can test the error scenario as well. Okay, now I'll go back here, I'll create another test, I'll just paste it here. So I'm saying I'm testing my render error state, and I set my error message to fail to fetch data. You can set any message you want here to test. Then I'm mocking the return value of my use query. So we know that this one will return only if is error from my use query is true, and then we are displaying the message from error. So that's the thing we are mocking. You mock return value is error set to true, and then error object is have a message with this error message here. Then again I'm rendering my component right there, and I'm getting back get by text, so I can find my message by text to be in document. Okay, now let's save this, and that works as well. Now I want to test that I'm able now to return some data here, so I will mock some data first, so I want to use many places. Then I will just go and create a test that check if my data is rendering. So check my data rendering. Okay, so again here renders data. I'm mocking now my use query with a value to be returned, which is data, as you remember. So we're accessing data here, and I'm passing data, but because they have the same name, this is a short one, or maybe let me just make you a different one, my data, so to avoid any confusion. So my data. Okay, so I'm mocking this value. Let me check, did it right? No, spelling mistakes again. So all I'm doing is that I'm mocking the return value, and I'm marking the data and I'm passing some hard-coded one. Okay, then of course I'm rendering my component so I can test. Then I want to check that my title, if you see we're rendering the titles, so I'm just checking that titles exist in my document for my both data. Okay, now let's save and see if this one works. And yes, it worked. Now next thing to test is the buttons, so previous and next. So let's start with the next button. So I'll paste here the code. So all I'm doing is first I'm marking the set page that we are passing as a parameter to our component, or as a property to our component. Okay, then I'm marking again the return value of data, and I'll pass my data to it. I'm just rendering my component, of course, that's what I have to do before I start testing. Then now I'm using wait for, and why I'm using wait for, because I have to have an action, a sync function that I have to listen to, then run some tests. So whenever you have to do that, you use the wait for it. Okay, so wait for, then I'm triggering the click on my button which have a text next page. Okay, then after that one is done, I am expected few things to happen. So if you go back here in my next button, I have this function triggering, and all what it does, it triggers the set page, which is a property passed in my component. So I'm checking first that my set page is being called. Okay, then I want it to be called with a value of number 2. If you remember, the next page pick up the previous state and add 1 to it. And because I render my component with 1, I'm expecting when I click my button to be called with number 2. Okay, next page will be number 2. And also I'm checking that my title here, okay, when I click next button, the first page, of course the second page will have number 2 in it. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Now let's save this and run it. And it's amazingly worked as well. So the previous button will be the same thing. Maybe I'll leave it for you to go and play around and try yourself. Okay, and even you can try some other scenarios if you want, like this no data and all that, and see what you can do with it. Now in the next video we'll go into the infinite scrolling.